like to pay my deepest respects to the Wurundjeri people, and my great thanks also to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, because what sorrow or sadness can't find consolation in the simple act of picking up a book to read. I think writing itself is a sure form of belief or faith, even if the task sometimes seems very perilous, and maybe peril is even required. As Auden wrote, "The sense of danger must not disappear. The way is certainly both short and steep. Look if you like, but you will have to leap." Salian saltare, sair, leaping forth with a dancing quality. As my book, Fallsbred, arose out of a profound love for the beautiful, long-gone horses of the show ring high jump era from the earliest part of the 20th century, I thought I would read from the prologue for you. The sound of horses' hooves turns hollow on the farms west of Wiri. If a man can still ride, if he hasn't totally lost the use of his legs, if he hasn't died to the part of his heart that understands such things, then he should go for a gallop. At the very least, he should stand at the road by the river, imagining that he's pushing a horse up the steep hill that leads to the house on the farm once known as One Tree. Don't fall off. Don't put the horse in those yards held up by various bits of twine and wire. Go for a gallop. Get off the horse's kidneys. Lean forward. Don't hold the reins up like that. Get them into a decent bridge. Through the stirrupines might come the voices of the dead. Through the stirrupines will come a hammering from the earth itself, as if all the high jump dreams of all the men and all the women who've worked this land has somehow turned the subsoil into stone. When that horse pulls up, half dead from the exertion, the sweat frothy under the reins, the rider should listen even more carefully. Listen, and there will be the sound of sobbing in there too, at One Tree, of dreams turned inside out the way the half-dingo cross wild dogs eat out the fetlocks on fresh-born calves before melting back into the uncleared land, the calf still bellowing. If the rider is a woman or a girl, she should maybe never venture up those hills of One Tree Farm. If the horse that she's on has already bolted and is hard in the mouth to boot, then she could spin it. Forgetting pretty, she could whirl it around and around, using her heels and her hands and the reins as her whip. If in her 14-year-old womb a dead uncle's baby grows, this One Tree Farm might just be steep enough to see that it begins to slip. Man, woman, boy or girl, when you arrive at the jacaranda, take a lick of your horse's salty neck. Watch out your horse doesn't throw its head and hit your nose with the bridle buckles. Lick that salt and see what story it tells. Under the mane, the salt is best. Watch out you don't cry. Thank you very much.
I find the flyer in the mailbox a few weeks before Christmas. Another chance, it says. There are photos of candles burning and a choir exultant in the park. Your angel will come in this time of hope. Date, location, and the angel in question. A photo of a woman in a white dress and wings. Ethereally blurry, but there's no denying the likeness to Abby. The shock of blood-red hair that used to spill all around her pillow as if she'd fallen from a great height. Abby, whom I loved so fiercely and drove to despair. Drove deep underground or into the ground, I have no idea. One day she was gone, escaping my need to bottle her up and hide her away from the light of day. Hide her somewhere she couldn't smile and laugh so brightly with every Tom, Dick and Harry. Somewhere I couldn't hear her flirting with the waiter, the baker, the candlestick maker. But I'm just being nice, she'd plead. Why won't you believe? Why won't you believe? She begged for trust, tolerance and faith. I saw a smoke screen covering her moves and stealing my face. Another chance, the flyer says. My hands are trembling as I fold it. My spine is tingling as I put it in my pocket. Not long after, I start noticing the flyer in other places all over town. Waiting for Ivan, the builder I work for, in his dark, empty house. It's there on the fridge, held by a magnet from Winsong Cottage, where he'd taken his wife once. Bubbles in the bottle, bubbles in the spa, pop, 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 all gone now. Iris at the yard has one taped to her screen beside the snap of her son. The angel looks like him, there's no question, even through the haze. Is he coming home after all this time? One step away from breaking the mist, no two angels look the same. An air of expectancy pervades the streets. The homeless and derelict stare at the sky with mouths open wide. Harper, the near-blind albino, stares right at me, grinning like a fool and flapping his arms. I know, I grin right back. They're coming. We go through the motions meantime, working half-pace, all children again, wishing the days away, distracted and vague. Until finally, the night is upon us. The town's regretful stream through the streets, clutching their flyers, sated with relief, sedated with belief. I nod to Ivan, I wave to Iris. Ronnie's with her, his two quick hands slow now by his sides, hanging limp from repentant shoulders, another rough beast slouching to Bethlehem. We gather in the park where candles struggle to pierce the low mist. Harper leads the choir, all blind and hands held. No carols or hymns or even words from their mouths, just a high, keening wail. And then something else. A sound up above, the beating of wings. All eyes are cast up at shapes in the mist. An excited, idiot murmur begins. I hear wings, straining to see, willing them down. But they'll come no closer, Harper tells us. He has authority here. He has always straddled worlds, half blind, half mad. Close your eyes, he advises. Keep them blind, whatever you hear, whatever you feel. I do as he says. I think of Abby's face. I smell her perfume in the tawny evening light of a pub beer garden, leaning into her, my head swimming with the sound of the wings. Fingers under my arms, my feet leaving the ground like the first time we met. The choir's sad song growing faint down below. Then I'm soaring, euphoric. Mind, spirit, body all in her hands now, my trust complete in its utter blindness. I won't open my eyes ever again if this is what it takes. But it's getting colder and the air's getting thin. Abby's grip is painful. Her hands are like claws now, the beat of her wings, the sound of leathery skin stretched tight across bone. Why won't you believe, she says. Why won't you believe? It's Abby's voice, but there's something wrong with it. So sly, so deceitful, so dreadfully hard to believe of an angel. True story, that one. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.
Egypt, 2011. Stripped down to my jeans and headscarf, kicked and stomped on, dragged through Tahrir Square by the Egyptian army, and then splashed onto the front pages of newspapers around the world. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the woman in the blue bra. My dear 19 generals in the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, my dear 19 Hosni Mubaraks, Let me tell you, those first 18 days in January were glorious. We chanted, "The people and the army are one hand," and we believed it. But within 2 weeks, you were dispersing us with beatings, electric rods, live ammunition. There have been almost 12,000 civilians tried in military tribunals. Boys and men who write their names on their arms so their mothers can identify them if they end up in a morgue. I can write for days on end what Mubarak's regime did to our men, what you distinguished generals are doing now. But not now, because I want to talk about women. My esteemed generals, I have heard that there are some among you who ask why I was not wearing layers of clothing under my coat when the weather has been so cold. They surmise that this means I intended to be assaulted and my blue bra showcased to the world to cause a scandal for your army. It is an interesting theory, and there are many ways I could refute such a charge. Let me offer one. Had this indeed been my plan, I wouldn't have worn a blue bra. I would have worn a red one to match the blood flowing from my body. You knew that humiliating women would anger the men who put the lives and honour of their mothers, daughters, sisters above their own. It was an idea borrowed from Mubarak's old strategy of using sexual violence against female activists. When the state brazenly legitimises sexual assault, it can mean only one thing: it is validating it. You hoped the Egyptian men in the streets would take your lead and continue the groping and fondling and poking until all those immoral protesting women were shamed into returning home, shamed into silence. Except you did not count on how much more loudly we would scream, and you didn't count on it backfiring. There were men who formed human chains around female protesters, who poured into Tahrir Square and chanted, "The women of Egypt are a red line. Our honour is a red line." I was still recovering from the attack when those protests took place. Thousands of people, thousands of women marched through the streets, some holding pictures of me. You issued an apology for what you described as an isolated incident, forgetting you had subjected some female protesters to virginity tests. We risk our lives because we are performing open heart surgery on an entire country. There are many diseases to cure. You generals represent one of them. The festering pustule of patriarchy, a disease that attempts to define one half of society as mere walking sex organs. There are walls of fear, class and gender to climb. There are those who are working on climbing them, both women and men, and there are those who are working on the other side, building a solid platform for us to step down on. Ask me what I believe in. I believe as an Arab I am a pawn in the world. I believe that World War I has never ended for the Arab world, that we suffer post-colonial stress disorder and are still carved up by Western knives, held by corrupt Arab leaders who are all too happy to plunge the knife into our bodies deeper and deeper, bleeding us. We bleed oil. We bleed security for Israel. We bleed military bases. We bleed Security Council vetoes. A nurse told me that if feminists owned oil reserves, things would be different. Do not misunderstand me. I am no Arab or Muslim woman in need of rescue by the West. But when the West finances the dictators who deny us our rights and then turns around and cries crocodile tears at our plight, I would just like the opportunity to say, screw you, because once upon a time you were content to watch us being screwed and you didn't bat an eyelid. Should this letter then also address the Western leaders of free nations who rub shoulders with our oppressors, who outsourced their dirty work to us and contracted our excellent torture services? Did it ever cross the mind of those in the coalition of the willing that the broken bodies and minds of Egyptians and the graves of those who never survived the electricity and waterboarding were the key performance indicators in Egypt's tender? No, their minds were too busy thinking about the war on terror, the oil, the Muslim boogeyman, Israel's goddamn security. I read a Western proverb, something about mothers telling their children to wear clean underwear because you never know when you might get hit by a car. I didn't really understand it. Anyway, I must go now. Another protest at Tahrir tomorrow. I better make sure I'm wearing clean underwear. You never know who will strip and beat you. Thank you.
I'm now in my 30s and I have a lot of friends who've become new parents. So it seems that every couple of months I'll go to a baby shower or visit some friends in hospitals. And it's really interesting, friends who are educated and, earn a bit of money, they have this idea of perfect parenthood. And if it's the first child, they believe that if they just try hard enough, their children will turn out well. So they buy these $1,000 buggy boo prams. And recently, one of my friends was going on about how her child, Kula Jemima, was going to be on solids for the first time. And in all seriousness, she'd gone on for weeks trying to figure out what solid will be her child's first mouthful. You know, whether it be mashed carrot, which was too bland and too pedestrian, or whether it would be rambutan, or whether it would be some other vegetable. And she finally settled on avocado. And this child is very young. And so I realised that there's this belief that there are good parents, and then there are people who shouldn't be parents at all, people whose very approach to parenthood would be actionable, and these people are generally of a certain class. So I'm going to tell you tonight about my very best friend Brianna, changed their names, and her dad, whom we called Uncle Shane. So Uncle Shane was this big, burly Australian guy with a mop of brown hair and these slate grey eyes, and he used to mow the lawns at Tottenham North Primary School back in the 1980s, and he would have a ride-on mower, and this was the kind of primary school it was. There were boys one day who came up to Uncle Shane and who yelled into his face because he had earmuffs on. They said, "Oi, you're a poofter." And he didn't make out what they were saying. He stopped his lawnmower, he got out of it, and he said, "What'd you say to me, son?" And so all the blood drained from their face. And now I didn't know what that was. I got them confused because for show and tell, a week before, there was a boy named Warren. He had a little pendant around his neck, and he brought it for show and tell, and he said, "Got a big fat poofta." And it was actually a big fat Buddha. So I didn't realise it was a bad word. So Uncle Shane said, "What did you say?" And the boy said, said, "Well, we think you're a big fat." And Uncle Shane leaned over to the boy and said, "Do you know what that is?" The boy shook his head. He was about 8 years old, and Uncle Shane told him, and all the colour drained out of his face, and he never called him that again. But this was Braybrook in the 1980s, and one of the stores that we frequently bought our groceries from was the Not Quite Right store, the NQR, where they had Reese's peanut butter cups in the early 80s, like 5 packets for $2 that you'd find in Lygon Street for $5 per little pack now. So the food had an interesting interpretation of expiry dates. It followed Nietzsche's philosophy of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So Uncle Shane, for Bianca's 9th birthday, he decided to get her treat from the Not Quite Right store, and he brought these 48 Mars bars. Now back then there was no such thing as fun size, though I can't for the life of me understand how anything this small could be considered fun. So anyhow, they were massive. They were the real size Mars bars. There were 48 of them. They were not quite right. They were probably expired, or they were probably from Indonesia. And he gave them to her. He gave them to her in one fell swoop. So he gave her these 48 Mars bars. And being a 9-year-old child, you have no sense of self-control. And not only that, you're not socially trained enough to share. So, you're told that you should share, but if you have 48 Mars bars, there's no way you're going to share those 48 Mars bars. So Bianca ate those 48 Mars bars. 7 days later, she had 7 left, and finally she decided to give them out in class. And what had happened was, she tells me to this day, and she tells this story frequently, she says, to this day I can never touch another Mars bar again. And so, my friend's child Jemima probably won't remember the taste of avocado at 1, but my friend remembers those Mars bars forever, and she'll never touch another one. So in hindsight, probably the best way to put your kid off crap like Mars bars forever is to do what Bianca's dad did. Thank you.
When my daughter was 10, I asked her, you know how Santa Claus comes to kids but not to adults? When do you think Santa will stop coming to you? My daughter sighed and said, oh, probably when you stop lying through your teeth. The thing is, I like believing in Santa. I want to believe all the religious stories that I've heard. 25 years ago in central Arnhem Land, I met an Aboriginal artist, Paddy Weinbranger. Mr. Weinbranger used to tell his story about old Captain Cooke from a million years ago. Captain Cooke was a good man who came from the north, Mosquito Island in Papua New Guinea. He bought useful things to share like knives and calico. He lived with his 2 wives on Sydney Harbour and built canoes and paddles. But then Satan arrived and he fought with Captain Cooke. Captain Cooke won and threw the devil's body down a hole, and that hole is a tunnel now that the cars go through. That is a good story. Mormons believe that there are multiple worlds and multiple heavens, and I like that story too. A couple of years ago, a few of us who are here tonight with the Indigenous Literacy Foundation were visiting kids in a remote Northern Territory school. There was a new teacher at the school, there's always a new teacher, who asked a teacher's aide, a local Jarwin lady, to tell the assembled visitors a little something of the frog dreaming story. Don't be shy, come on. The teacher was probably expecting a sweet bedtime story about frogs. The young woman looked pretty surprised. Really? She seemed to ask. She looked at an older Jarwin lady who nodded. Okay then. The teacher's aide then firmly warned us all, children and visitors alike, if anybody went near the swamp area site of the frog dreaming, we would get pregnant. The teacher looked like she might faint dead away. I thought she was going to say, oh, that can't be right. What happens is a pigeon comes down from the clouds and talks in the Virgin's ear, and then a bit later she gives birth to the Son of God. But it wasn't a Catholic school. The Yarralin community elder and one of the original Wave Hill strikers, the splendidly named Hobbles Daniari, once told anthropologists his version of the Captain Cooke story. Ned Kelly joined with the Aboriginal people to defend the country against the Captain Cooke-led invasion. In his story, it's Captain Cooke who's the devil. Mr. Daniari, who is fluent in 5 languages then, turned up one Sunday to take on the Pentecostal missionaries who kept bothering the Yarralin community, despite being told to leave many times. He brought with him a long butcher's knife and a copy of the Bible. He slashed and chopped up the Bible, shouting, "Strike me dead, God! If this is your book, strike me dead." He was not struck down. It was he who said to us white fellas, we're not trying to push you back to London and big England, but what's your feeling? You the one been making a lot of mistake, but we can be joined in, white and black and yellow. This is a big country and we've been mix 'em up. He meant there's room for everybody. We're on this land now. We can be friendly, join in, be friends, mates together. So if you ask me, thanks to Hobbles Daniari, that's the big picture sorted. So tonight I'm going to leave you with a little belief of mine. I'm about the same age as Elle Macpherson, but for all our similarities, I may as well be an otter. Should I try to look more like Elle? No, for yea, verily, this will make me look like otter dressed as lamb. Given the choice of doing nothing or cosmetic surgery, we're all going to have to make the choice between looking old and looking weird. Our faces will wrinkle and go south, or we'll end up looking like the Joker from Batman. So I choose old. I don't want to wake up in 20 years with a head like a peeled boiled egg and lips like 2 bursty raw pork sausages. Instead, I intend to let nature take its course. I believe this means I will soon look like a cross between Mother Teresa, Cousin It, and a random scrotum. I urge you to join me.
It took me almost 6 years to research and write my most recent book, The Street Sweeper, a novel which deals with, among other things, history and various kinds of racism. And one of the things I did for my mental health as much as for my physical health during those 6 years was jog, or at least walk, pretty much every day. And one morning, unusually early for someone so frequently in the merciless, tepid yet unforgiving grip of insomnia, I was pounding my way down the road when I noticed a tradesman of some kind inside the cabin of his ute with a fork in his hand, focusing his attention on both the fork and the contents of a transparent plastic container. The man had black hair and brown skin, and he looked thin. There are so many places on earth he could have come from, and now he was in my neighbourhood. As I got closer, I tried to see what it was he was eating. It was early enough for it to be the man's breakfast, but the dust already on his clothes permitted the possibility that even that early he'd been working for some time. So perhaps it was his morning tea. And I wondered, what was that in the transparent container? Was it a traditional dish from whatever far-off place he had come from that he was savouring in the early hours of the morning, temporarily away from the work site of his employer, whose house the black-haired, brown-skinned man could never even aspire to for himself and his wife? As I drew level with the driver's door, I looked into the cabin of the dark-skinned tradesman's ute to see precisely what it was he was eating. And going too fast to satisfy myself with any certainty as to his food, I was there just long enough to see the man's face. And that's where I saw the sequelae of the disease that we identify as racism. Having seen me coming as I ran on the road toward him, his face was a cocktail of embarrassment, apprehension, and defiance. Why was he embarrassed? Because I surmised he'd been caught eating his wog food, some kind of weird concoction we don't yet eat. Why was he apprehensive? Because a white man was running towards him, possibly with hostile intent. Why was he defiant? Because he'd been in Australia long enough to know that he had to be. He'd been here long enough to organise a car and a job, so whatever his first language, whatever difficulties he has with English, he's heard strident rants, perhaps on a building site, and cascades of invective about foreigners on talkback radio. Perhaps, like the rest of us, he hears simple language being used over and over to frighten us, used like a drum that never stops beating. Stop the boats, stop the boats, stop the boats. He knows it's not really the boats that are the problem. Why has a nation of some 23 million been obsessed for the last 10 years or more with a problem that sees at most 6,000 desperate people caught illegally trying to come to Australia without permission? It can't be the number, because 6,000 out of 23 million is insignificant. And let's be honest with each other. We know, just as the man in the ute knows, it's the kind of people who are illegally trying to get here. What kind of people are they? They're brown, they're Asian, sometimes they're black, they're poor, and they don't speak English. This is not really a national problem deserving of the almost relentless attention it's been getting in the Australian media for over 10 years. More attention than the Indians who get bashed and sometimes murdered on our streets. More attention than the massive disparity in life expectancy, educational and employment opportunities between Indigenous Australians and the rest of us. More attention than the fact that our farmers are getting squeezed till they can barely afford to stay on the land, and the country towns they're from are losing their young. more attention than the fact that 47% of adult Australians are functionally illiterate, more attention than the exporting of jobs offshore, more attention than the destruction of our manufacturing sector to the point where we don't really make anything except lattes and hairdressing appointments. More attention than the disguised unemployment that sees just under 2 million people wanting to work full-time now or in the next 4 weeks, but having either no work or too little. More attention than the over 2 million Australians who live in a household where nobody has a job. These are among Australia's real problems. These problems really matter. Then there are the environmental problems that are just our own, and the existential problem we share with the rest of the world, climate change. But despite these very real and pressing problems Australia faces, we're more likely to wake up to the chant in the media, "Stop the boats, stop the boats." And we keep hearing that because both major parties find these problems so difficult they don't even acknowledge the existence of most of them. But they do know that there are votes in the exploitation and of the latent xenophobia in most of us. And so they compete with each other in their exclusion of the weak and the persecuted with a different skin colour or different religion. A few mornings after I first saw the brown-skinned workman eating something in the cabin of his ute, I was pounding the streets when I saw him in his ute again. This time there was a child beside him, a little boy, looking every inch the boyhood version of his father. While his father instinctively looked away as I came toward the ute, the little boy's attention was captivated by the person running in a regular rhythm and getting closer and closer as I came toward them. Children are not born hating or fearing other groups. We teach them that. In fact, children don't even know who's in their group and who isn't. Ask a 6-year-old to name the kids in his or her class, and he or she will give you a list of names, including many nearly unpronounceable names, without realising that any of those names are unusual. The little boy's black eyes widened as I drew level with him and his dad inside their ute, and he smiled. And when I waved, he gave me a cheery wave back. Will he grow up with an experience of life in Australia engendering a ready-made expression of embarrassment, apprehension and defiance whenever a stranger looks at him? Or will he keep smiling and waving? The default expression he acquires between now and the time he grows up will be determined by us. Which is it going to be? It's entirely up to you. Thanks for coming.
In 1971, my family migrated from England to Western Australia. I was 6 years old. We flew out with Singapore Airlines. The hostesses, with their long patterned skirts tight around their legs, were impossibly tiny and beautiful. I thought they were probably another species, a type of fish or bird, a mermaid of the air. Mrs. Tiggywinkle was in my satchel with Basil Brush. The flight was long, but I had a colouring book for new Australians. Use black, it said, for the swan and the Aborigine, red for the kangaroo and grey for the shark. A real estate agent came to collect us from Perth Airport in a white Valiant station wagon with fins. It was a huge car, a car from American television. The real estate agent flipped out a little handle on the rear door and wound down the window so my brother and I could climb in the back. It was the cleverest and most modern invention I had ever seen. We drove off into the suburbs with the window half down and great slabs of hot air pouring in. The window in your body that opens when you go from one place to another doesn't stay open for long. It's closing the minute you arrive. But for a short time, each taste, smell, sound, sight was particular and incomparable. For a few weeks of 1971, everything to me, at 6 years of age, felt alarming. The Australian sun went down fast and heavy, like a medicine ball dropping from the sky. I didn't understand why it was still warm at night. Was the sun still in the sky, but invisible? Was it hiding somewhere in the dark? My brother burnt his leg on the metal buckle of a car seat belt. The swans on the Swan River were a disturbing inky black. I assumed they were white underneath and had been painted by the government to match the washed-out vegetation. Runners of brown grass struggled to establish themselves across the sand that surrounded our new house. The hot, soft sand worried me. It felt weak underfoot. How did our house stand up on the sand? Why didn't all of the houses collapse? Was it a good idea to build the city of Perth on something as insubstantial as sand? But the body struggles to habituate. It insists on habituating. Soon the clean eye is gone and everything is unremarkable again. Within a few weeks, our accents started to change. And 3 months after we arrived, we went down to the docks to collect our stuff, and it already seemed dumb, an embarrassing reminder of our old lives. There was our woolen underwear from Marks and Spencer's, our chest x-rays, our boxes of Yardley soap on a rope. I'm not sure what my mother thought was unavailable in this country, soap or rope. There were our 600 AA batteries and our set of leather-bound Charles Dickens. The books were wrapped in our winter sheets, and I remember unwrapping them and thinking that they smelt unmistakably of England. They smelt of gravy. I would love to say that these books were family heirlooms that we were transporting to our new life in our new country, but my dad had bought them from a junk shop just before we left. I think he had the notion that he'd be able to sell them in Australia and make a lot of money, as if he would be the first person to bring the famous writer to this wild and faraway place. But by the time the books arrived, my father was already an Australian, and they sat on the shelf gathering dust. My family wasn't a book family, it was a TV family. Our heroes were the two Ronnies and a 9-fingered Irish comic called Dave Allen. My mother read Georgette Heyer, and my dad read Playboy in secret. For various reasons, the new country didn't fix the old fractures of the family, and it came apart. At 12, I found myself mostly alone for one very long and very hot Perth summer. With the cicadas thrumming incessantly in the distance, I took one of the Charles Dickens books off the shelf and started to read. And I had for the first time the sensation of my mind separating from my body and meeting the mind of the author in a place with no actual geography. I didn't know what this place was called then. I know now it is the imagination. By my early 20s, I had a serious book habit. I was working then as a park ranger in remote national parks in Central Australia. The nearest library was 400 kilometres away. A librarian chose books for me and then sent them down on a Greyhound bus. I read a lot of Australian novels, but I read books from other places too. Sometimes I found that the books I read at night continued to speak to me during the day, and sometimes I would find myself uncannily connected with the books. As I read about Clem Yeobright cutting furs on Egdon Heath in Thomas Hardy's Return of the Native, I found myself cutting spinifex for a walking track in the shadow of Uluru. I was very taken with Hardy's nature novels set in the county of Wessex. When I travelled back to England at the age of 20 to visit my relatives, I went to Victoria Station and asked for a ticket to Wessex. One British Rail employee spoke to another and another until they found someone who politely explained to me that Wessex wasn't a real place. It was a place in books, a place that exists only when reading. So when it comes down to it, when I think about what I believe in, it always comes back to reading. I'm not a team player. I don't like sport, cooking, renovating or going to parties. I like to read. I like to enter the private and enclosed space of the book. I like that feeling of the world falling away from me as I slide into the story. I don't really know or care about what reading does for the mind. I care that it softens the heart.
Hi, and thank you for your continued support of the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. Tonight I'm going to just read you a list, 9 dumb things that I've believed in the past and am fairly sure I will never believe again. 1. Before I started school, I believed there was a letter of the alphabet called N-or-Men-or-B. I can tell some of you must know what I'm talking about, H-I-J-K-N-or-Men-or-B. My teacher and classmates, of course, were very quick to point out my mistake, and we all had a good laugh. I mean, they all had a good laugh, and I had a little cry. 2. At the age of 9, as a result of being shown a very coy sex education film at a father and son night at my primary school, I formed the belief that a woman got pregnant as a result of sitting next to her husband on a park bench. The film showed them sitting there holding hands, and in the next scene the woman was pregnant. In the absence of any alternative explanation for how this might have happened, I imagined that the sperm must have crawled down the man's leg, across the ground, up the woman's leg, and made a baby. I was quite surprised and delighted to find out many years later that this was not, in fact, how babies were made. 3. I used to believe that the main function of a post office was for buying stamps and sending letters. I now realise it's actually a place to buy Donald Bradman DVDs, coffee mugs, water bottles, cameras, phones, skipping ropes, chemistry sets, soft toys, calendars, jungle-themed money boxes, torches, printers, travel pillows, Toy Story colouring books, wrought iron frogs, outdoor weather stations, sewing machines, there really was one there, radio-controlled robot cars, chewing gum, cough lollies, sand from Gallipoli, and books about deranged criminals, and volumes 1, 2 and 3 of The World According to Jeremy Clarkson. I have plenty of time to observe this because the queues are quite long as a result. Number 4, in my early 20s as a university student where I learned to question all of my previously held beliefs, it occurred to me that the idea of brushing your teeth with toothpaste was probably just a scam dreamed up by some greedy toothpaste companies in order to sell more toothpaste, and that I could brush with water just as effectively and save a lot of money in the process. 6 months, 3 fillings and many hundreds of dollars worth of dental bill later, I came to believe that there just might be something in this toothpaste business after all. 5. I believe that the funniest joke in the world is the following nonsensical riddle. Question, why did the boy fall off his bike? Answer, because his mother threw a fridge at him. You laughed. It's not funny at all, of course, but that's what makes it so funny. It's quite disturbing, really, when you think about it. Actually, I lied about how I believe that last joke is the funniest joke in the world, number 6, because I was worried that I might offend somebody if I told you what I really deeply believe is the funniest joke in the world, which is this one. A man is in a movie theatre watching a film and he smells a terrible smell. It seems to be coming from the man in front of him, so he leans over and says, "Hey mate, did you just shit your pants?" The man says, "Yes." The first man says, "Well, hadn't you better leave?" And the other man says, "Why? The movie isn't over yet." Number 7. I believe it may have been a mistake to tell you that last deeply unpleasant joke. But I'm glad I did, because I really do believe that it's important to stay right to the end of a movie. Call me old-fashioned, but I consider it a mark of respect to the director and a matter of simple courtesy to the other patrons. I think you should stay seated until the credits are finished and the music has stopped, even if you are unfortunate enough to have soiled your trousers, which of course can happen to anyone. I mean, it happened to me several years ago during a screening of the Blair Witch Project. 8. Technically speaking, that man in the movie theatre joke is probably more of a personal anecdote than a joke. But I still believe it's pretty funny, although it wasn't at the time. Thank you for your patience.
I knew you'd come back. Cookie smiled lazily at me. She looked beautiful, at least 7 months pregnant. Her dark hair longer and softer, rich down around her shoulders. She sat in front of her red crystal ball, one hand on it, the other holding mine. I was back in New York City. I told everyone I was going to see relatives and for work meetings. But now, sitting once more in Cookie's psychic shop front in the East Village, I knew why I'd really come back. It took you a long time, Cookie yawned. I know, I'm sorry. I've been in Australia. I live there. Well, that's okay. Here you are now. So this is between you and me. Don't talk about it with your friends, and don't see no other psychics. I have seen some others. That's the past. We're going to the future. No more. I'm Skyping with my spiritual healer in Melbourne tomorrow. I can't cut her out. Okay, a healer, okay, but nobody else in New York. You gotta respect my work. Okay, let's begin. Cookie looked into her crystal ball. Her eyes glazed over. She began to speak in her monotone trance. You are going to have a long life. 3 children. That's what you said last time. Well, I meant it. But now I'm 33. So what? You can keep them coming till you're 55. That ain't no big deal. She looked back into the ball. You got a good career. You was going to start making the money you want to be making. Money will not be a problem for you in this life. You have been lonely. But soon love is going to treat you good too. So you see, it's all good news. That's great. She paused, looked me in the eyes. But you still got the curse. I was wondering about that. I told you that night a year ago we had to get rid of it and you didn't listen. But you was led back here. Yes. But now it's double the price, $2,500. Cookie, I can't afford that. Well, you should have done it last time like I told you, because now it's worse. What, you think a curse like that is going to go away by itself? $2,500 is too much, Cookie. I can't afford it. Well, why don't you tell me how much you can afford, and we'll work it out. $300. I can't do what I got to do for $300. Not now that the curse is so strong. It's surrounding your soul. The darkness, the evil spirits, they got you. It's big work for me. I got to get the candles, take them into the church, burn them. You got to go higher than that. $500. That's as high as I can go. It's not enough. I know you has thought about it every day since you was last in here. What can you offer me realistically? $600. $900 plus the crystal ball reading. I'm pregnant, so I'm doubly as powerful than usual. You get those benefits. I don't know, Cookie. In a minute I'm going to ask you to leave, because I don't need this disrespect for my work. And if we don't do it tonight, the curse will set in forever. It has to be tonight or never. Okay, $900. But I can only give you $400 tonight. That's fine, hon. I trust you. Cookie walked me up to Duane Reade Pharmacy on the corner. I went in and got the cash out. Back in her shop front, I counted out $400 for her. And the crystal ball reading, I counted another $175. Here, you got 3 crystals to meditate with. This one for your third eye, this one for your heart, and this one for your navel. You come back with the crystals and the remaining $500, and then I will tell you how my work's gone. When should I come? Anytime. I'm always here. I live here in the back. You know that. On the way home, I stopped back in Duane Reade Pharmacy and ate their salmon sushi for dinner. A few hours later, I was starting to feel very nauseous. I went to bed and went in and out of sleep and hallucinations. I could see Cookie standing in my room. I could hear her negotiating with evil spirits in the corner. I ran into the bathroom and threw up. I threw up all night. In the morning, I Skyped with my healer in Melbourne as I lay in bed unable to move. I told her what had happened. Is it real? I asked her. Or did I just get food poisoning from the Duane Reade Pharmacy sushi? First of all, my healer said, it's probably not the best idea to eat sushi from a pharmacy. Second of all, the fact is, no one can curse you unless you believe it. That's good, except I believe it. Stop thinking about her with fear. Go back in with a light heart and ask if you can write about her, because that's what you want to do anyway. Just be honest. If you're transparent, it changes the whole situation. I felt better after Skyping with my healer. My nausea went away. I ate some dry biscuits, showered, and went to see Cookie. She was sitting behind her crystal ball reading a magazine. Oh, hello, she said when I walked in. I have some news for you. What is it? It's about the curse. I was throwing up all night. Was that because I ate sushi from Duane Reade? No, that was the devil's spirits leaving you. I counted out the final $500 that I owed her into her hands, and I waited for the next hook for her to upsell. But Cookie just half smiled and shrugged her shoulders. Well, the good news is you're cured. I couldn't believe it. What, really? The curse is gone? Yep. And don't listen to no psychic that tells you got one, because you don't. You're cured. I lifted it just like I said I would. Thank you. You're welcome. Cookie, you remember I told you I'm a writer? Yeah. Can I spend some time with you to write about you? I'd pay you for your time. She looked slightly wary. What would it mean? I guess I'd just like to see what you do during the day, ask you questions. I would pay you. She looked nervous. My work is private. Oh, I understand that. I wouldn't write about your work. I wouldn't write about the mystical things you do. It would just be you. I feel so strongly about you. I think about you all the time. I realized that for the first time, Cookie was backing away from me. Ever so slightly, she was closing the transaction. You know, you could write a book about me, how I cured you, and thousands of people would come here and I would cure them too. But I can't do it, because you have to respect your gift. That's right. Thank you for understanding. I admire you for it, Cookie. And I did. Cookie had been honest from the start. She was offering a service for a particular amount of money, where I was half in there as a client and half as a writer. But even so, as I walked out into the street to head towards Times Square, the winter air on my face, I knew I was cured.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about a belief that I have in the power of touch, of physical touch, how it sustains us and how it nurtures us. I come from a time and place where people rarely touched each other. It was embarrassing for someone to physically touch you. With our parents, we wouldn't know if they loved each other, if they hated each other, or if they were indifferent to each other. And the only time that men or boys were engaged in touching other men or boys was to hurt them in a fight or something like that. And it took a long time for me to understand how touching someone and the beauty of that was something that would be important to me and important to those that I love. I learned it through the birth of my first daughter, Erin, who was 28 years of age, that when we brought her home from the hospital on Ash Wednesday 1983, and it was very hot and oppressive, the only way I could get her to sleep was to stick my leg out of the bed, to stick it in the bassinet and sit it on the bottom of my foot on her foot and rock her to sleep. And all through her childhood, if she ever felt weary but couldn't sleep, if I did that again, if we touched our feet together, she would very easily go to sleep. I learnt it through the birth of my youngest daughter, Nina, who's 14 years of age, who I delivered in an emergency in my mother's laundry in Collingwood. And as my baby daughter fell into my arms, I felt a shock of electricity run up both my arms in such an amazing way and in such a feeling that even talking about it now, I still get those tingles of electricity through my body. I learnt it when my grandmother in 1996, at the age of 88, was dying of renal failure in St Vincent's Hospital, that we made a pact as a family that we would stay with my grandmother in the last week of her life and that someone would hold her hand continually through that period. And we thought we were helping her, but that touch was something that helped all of us. And I learnt it through the fact that as a grown man, it's not a problem to hug another grown man. It's something that I think as men we need to understand, and something we need to pass on, particularly to our sons, that it is actually something of value to have that intimacy with other men. But what I want to tell a little story about is a wonderful moment of physical touch and intimacy which had a dramatic impact and changed my life. 14 years ago, I fell in love with a woman that I was working with. I was single at the time, and she was just a friend, and we spent several weeks together talking and having lunch because she was about to leave Australia and possibly never come back. And on the last day that I was to see her in those weeks, we had lunch together, and then I walked her home, and I got near the corner of her house, which, by the way, is on the corner of Gore and Smith Street, if anyone wants to go down there and have an intimate moment with a partner. Not too intimate. And as we said goodbye, she kissed me lightly on the cheek. It was so light it would be like a butterfly's feather fluttering against your cheek. And as I walked away, I could feel it, both that beautiful subtle sensation but almost burning my cheek at the same time. And I knew then that I was desperately in love with this woman, but I also knew that she was leaving the country to go to the other side of the world, and she was possibly never coming back. So what I did after she left is I walked down to the mouth of the Yarra River, and I called out to her to come back, and she didn't hear me. And this is I'm a realist as a writer, so this is the true bit. So I swam out to the heads. I stood at the heads and called her. I thought maybe she'll pick it up from here. She still didn't hear me. And I went back home dejected that I would never see this woman again. Then several months later, I heard that she was back in the country, but she certainly hadn't contacted me. And I thought, well, obviously there's nothing there. I was imagining this. It was a wonderful fantasy, but it's over. And then one Friday morning there was a knock at the door, and I was going through a bit of financial difficulty at the time. I was expecting a debt collector or the police. So I thought, I'm not going to answer that. And then there was another vigorous knock on the door, and I felt the volume of that knock thumping against my chest, that notion of touch again. And I thought, well, this is either a very big copper or this is something very important. So I opened the front door, and here was this beautiful woman, the same woman, with the sun, the morning sun behind her, and she was glowing like an angel. And she said to me, "You owe me a kiss." And she stayed, and she hasn't left. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Casey. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Oh, look, I'm live. Excuse me. Oh, no, it's muted down. If you want to see Australia, I know some things that you should do. Spend a night on Sydney Harbour, spend a day at Uluru, travel deep into the forests, lie on beaches in the sun. But if you're really into Dada, I know attraction number one. You should see the big banana. See it once before you die. It's somewhere right up near Coffs Harbour, and I don't know the reason why. Oh, why they had to build a big banana. It doesn't make much sense to me, but it's a very big banana. That's a funny thing to see. Now in the past you've been bewildered. You might have felt the need to pray. You had no truck with golden idols. You looked to God to light your way. But sometimes organized religion spins you round until you find you lose your taste for easy answers. I've something tastier in mind. Why not ask the big banana? You don't often see a fruit that size. It won't answer any questions, so it won't tell you any lies, no lies. It has no special secret powers, nothing wholly guaranteed. But it's a very big banana. That might just be what you need. Whistle solo in Melbourne Town Hall. Whistle solo from that person there. Oh, not bad. For in my life there have been moments when I betrayed what I held dear. I lacked the strength of my convictions, intimidated by my fear. But even in those yellow moments, I like to think that I can see when I find my inspiration, how courageous I can be. For someone built the big banana. They had a big banana dream. Now I might not own up to a vision so phallocentrically extreme. Instead they built the big banana. They wore their heart out on their sleeve. And you say it's just a big banana. It all depends what you